systems and making sure things are backed up and making sure everything's working properly, we could discuss how that can work. Feels a little far away, but I can't. My Logitech gaming software is not functioning, so I'm just gonna leave it. People can see my room. It's nice. I think you want the other way. Yeah, the other way.
Good evening. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin. And we are the Dungeon Dudes.
Welcome to our monthly Patreon Q&A, where we take questions from our Patreon supporters, answer them here on chat, and hopefully we get a few questions from the stream chat as well, and we can answer those. For those of you wondering, this is just a little experiment in us trying to stream this directly to YouTube. Hopefully, get more of the folks that are watching our live streams and our videos on YouTube to check out our live streams, and also this means that we should be able to get the VOD for those of us that can't watch this live right up onto YouTube much sooner. So we're just trying this as an experiment. Let us know your feedback on if you enjoy watching here on YouTube or on Twitch.
Yeah, and so if this is your first time attending a Q&A, Monty and I are going to ask you guys in chat to just reserve your questions for the end, because we are going to try to do as many Patreon requested questions first. We have a lot to get through, so we've tried to pick out some of the ones that we think we have some really amazing answers for, and really try to cover as much as we can with as few questions as we can, so that we can fit as many in as possible.
Yeah, we got some fantastic questions this evening from our patrons. Some of the questions are huge, and we could spend a whole video talking about them. And some of our questions are questions that we've already made an entire video about as well. So we tried to balance out those topics as well. And we got almost 100 questions submitted from our patrons. So with 2 hours tonight, we don't have time to take every single one, but we do have some amazing ones here, and we will try to take some questions from chat towards the end as well. Tonight we are going to be talking about both taking questions about dungeon mastering in general. So we got some really cool of the 100 questions we submitted, 80 of them were about DMing.
Yeah.
And then most of the remainder were actually about our upcoming Dungeons of Drakkenheim Kickstarter, which is going live on Monday.
So if you do not know about this, then that's exciting news. Is we are launching a book on Kickstarter. It's going to be based on season 1 of our live play campaign, Dungeons of Drakkenheim. So if you're looking for an open sandbox adventure set within a ruined dark fantasy city filled with cosmic horror, then we have a campaign for you.
Yeah. If you have ever wanted to run a player-driven sandbox game filled with faction intrigue and exploration, with cool puzzles, cool problems to solve, a campaign that you as a DM aren't sure where it's going to go, but you felt that's a really cool idea, but that sounds really intimidating to actually put that together, well, try Drakkenheim. Yeah. Because we've done our best to make sure that even though a Drakkenheim campaign is completely unpredictable in the way that it will go, that you have the tools in this book to still keep on track with the rails getting demolished in front of you, just as we did in our original campaign.
I think that if you have played any D&D adventure, you are ready to DM a game of Dungeons of Drakkenheim. And if you're a brand new DM, you're still ready. And if you're just a player, you know what? Buy the book anyway. Everybody who's listening to this, just grab the book. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? And
you know what the best part is you've got an entire YouTube channel by two handsome gentlemen with lots of great advice on how to run awesome D&D games. And WebDM, in fact, those very guys are doing their own Kickstarter too. So
I didn't see that coming.
Lots of, actually, tons of awesome folks are running some amazing Kickstarters as well right now. It is going to be a big summer. I hope your wallet is ready, because mine is not. No. So with that, why don't we dive in with some of our DM advice questions? Kelly, why don't you pick one out of the hat there?
All right, so let's start things off with a question from Marty. Do you know of a good rules source for when characters want to harvest monster parts for alchemical or magic purposes? I'll start things right off with saying that we have a great resource for you. Our friends over at Ghostfire Games have a wonderful world called Grim Hollow. And in their upcoming Monster Grimoire book, there is going to be rule sets for how to harvest monster parts and the crazy things that you can make with them. So that whole rule set is coming in Grimhollow.
That said, if you're wanting a fast and loose way to adjudicate, how players can craft things with monster parts, my long and short rule of thumb is this. A challenge rating 1 to 4 monsters' body parts can be harvested to make uncommon and common magic items. A challenge rating 5 to 10 monster can make rare magic items, and an 11 to 16 monster challenge rating will make very rare items, and a legendary monster will make not a legendary monster, a level 17, a challenge rating 17 or higher monster will make legendary magic items. And from there, it's just a matter of matching the monster to the magic item. And you could use any existing magic item for this purpose. So for example, perhaps to make a Staff of the Magi, you need the shards of a Lich's phylactery. Or perhaps to make a Flame Tongue sword, you need a Fire Elemental's essence. Right? Perhaps to make a Carpet of Flying, you need the last breath of a genie, right? So you just kind of match out. You think, what is a monster that makes thematic sense with this magic item, and match that there.
I think that that's an awesome answer. I also think that if you wanted to go even looser with that, you could just scrap the needing anything specific and just kind of do the logic where it's like you get rare parts, uncommon parts, legendary parts, very rare parts, and you have to accumulate enough of them to then make the item. And that would be a really simple way to run it. Yeah,
you could actually categorize the parts by rarity and have like monsters of a specific tier. I would avoid anything that was grindy in like a World of Warcraft sort of way of like, go get 10 bear tails and 6 fire elemental cores, and then, smash your hammer and the dust kicks up and you have an item. So yeah. And then you might just work with your players on a homebrew way of homebrewing items based on that.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next question from RM147. Any advice for adding new players partway through a campaign?
This is hard. I have done this many times where I've brought in a new player partway through a campaign. And actually, I think there's a distinction here. Is it a new player to Dungeons and Dragons? Is it a new player to tabletop role-playing games? Or is it a player that is just a new addition to your group who has played D&D before? Because I think it's different. What do you think, Kelly?
I know exactly where you're going with that. I hadn't really considered that in my idea of the answer. Because if they're brand new to D&D, you probably don't want to restrict or you don't want to put too much pressure on them to fit into the already nuanced story.
Because I remember Joe joined our group partway through a campaign, but he'd played D&D before. He knew how role-playing games worked, and he just literally it was I think with that one, it was like the party needed to seek out a druid for help. So that druid was played by Joe, and then he just joined the group, right? Yeah. So if you have an experienced player, you just can create a quest where the existing players need the help of that character, of the new player's new character, and an experienced player will probably be fine, right?
One thing that I've done is when I had a player, what I would ask of a player who's a little bit more experienced, who is coming into your campaign partway through, is to be a little bit more lenient with their backstory so that you can help meld it. I was running Tyranny of Dragons, and I had a player join the campaign when we finished Horde of the Dragon Queen and we're moving on to Rise of Tiamat. And what I did is he wanted to play a cleric, and he wanted to be like a knightly cleric from one of the major cities. So I actually had him be the son of one of the council members. And he was recruited by the council in Tyranny of Dragons to join the party to make sure that the council's desires were being looked after by this character. So in Rise of Tiamat, when they arrived at the council, the one was like, I'm sending my son with you, and you don't have a choice in that because you're working with us. And it allowed me to meld that character into the story, and they gave me what they wanted out of their backstory, and I just used that to bend some edges and make it fit into the campaign.
But I'll give another example of when Kyle joined our group. And we were very high level at that point, and Kyle was not familiar with D&D. He'd never played D&D before. And so it took Kyle time to warm up to it. The benefit for Kyle, though, is that Kyle had played a lot of video games, right? So he understood, like, he picked up the mechanics immediately and really fell into it. The challenge on the flip side, and this is where I'd be the most careful. My partner, she is awesome, she's brilliant, she's smart, but she's not a gamer. And so we actually had a conversation because I was like, do you want to play D&D with us? And she's like, well, I don't really know if I want to join your campaign in progress. I would feel more comfortable coming in at the beginning of a new campaign. And so when you invite a new player, particularly someone that you are inviting to a campaign and that they've never played D&D before, I think that for someone who is completely new to role-playing games, the concept of gaming, the concept of maybe TTRPGs in general or role-playing games in general, you might want to reconsider inviting them to a campaign if it's already in progress, because I think that for a new player, the experience of starting out at the beginning of a game, the beginning of a story, it makes it far less overwhelming for them, and they get to ease into how it works. Because someone who is new to your campaign is both learning the rules of D&D, the rules of your world, and they're learning the group dynamic of your existing group. So when you have someone that has never played D&D before, that has never played role-playing games, you're asking them to learn a lot. And that's often overwhelming, and that's why I've often seen a new player who's totally new to RPGs get invited to an existing high-level group, and they just kind of go in their shell. Sometimes it's the opposite, but in general, I think it is healthier for a completely new player to be introduced with a completely new campaign, and I would strongly think about the experience that person is going to have before I invite them into a campaign that is ongoing. Instead, I might be tempted to run a one-shot for them or a two-shot.
Awesome. Glamour Moth asks, how do I best support players to create characters with individual goals, motives, and drives, besides requesting that they have them? My answer is you shouldn't have to worry about requesting that they have them, and that's exactly what you should do, in my opinion. Whenever we're setting out to create characters, Monty and I have a pretty deep chat about the individual goals, motives, and drives of the character. And we have a distinct back and forth where Monty asks specific questions and then uses his lore for his world to complement what I'm giving him. So if I say my goal is that my family is missing, he says, okay, well, what if your family was this blacksmith? And it's like, okay, cool. I can live with that. And Monty already has an idea that what he's doing is tying it to certain elements of the campaign. But we're very open with that. There's no like, oh, don't ask me what my goals, motives, and drives are. I think that DMs and players should be extremely open. If players want to get the most out of this game, tell your dungeon master everything you want out of this game. And they'll help make it happen. The more tools they have, the more likely it is that they can satisfy your needs as a player.
So the first thing that I'll say is that Dyson Logos, who is one of my favorite RPG cartographers, turned me onto a role-playing game called Fiasco. And Fiasco has a really cool character creation system where your character, and actually because Fiasco is designed that it's designed to actually recreate like a Quentin Tarantino movie. And the way that Fiasco works is you kind of create the play script at the start of the game. Like everyone comes to the table ready to create like characters and stuff and decide their relationships. And so if you look up on Google, Dyson Logos, totally not a D&D fiasco. He's put together this one-page sheet of character motivations, relationships, goals, and locations. And it's a table of 6 things that you can roll a D6 for. And so what I did with my players is I said, if you don't pick one, I'm going to roll for you. And sometimes I find that what I found was that giving players that handout from Dice and Logos gave them ideas and inspiration. Sometimes not everyone has read as many books, has read as much fantasy, has thought about all the ideas. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And so sometimes players fall back on the fantasy staples, or just kind of don't get their creative juices flowing because they haven't given themselves the opportunity to be inspired by something else. So give your players some inspiration. It doesn't have to be a 30-page world building document. Look at what Dice and Logos did with the Totally Not a D&D Fiasco sheets, and you can give that to players during session 0 and they will roll with it. And it will work. It worked for me.
Here's a question from B. I feel like I am railroading, but my players say they don't feel like I am. They're all my good friends, and of course I believe them. And I've been open to them about the fact that it's fairly linear. How can I shake things up? So we've talked about this actually several times, but I want to make sure that we say it again because I think this is really important. There's a negative connotation that comes with the term railroading, and a lot of people assume that any sort of non-open-ended campaign is railroading. But I think that with the negative connotation, it's very important to specify the difference between a linear campaign and railroading. A linear campaign is a story that moves in one direction. You move from one location to the next. The story then says, oh, you completed this. Now you go here and do this. That is fine. And within those, as long as you're letting your players make choices, and those choices have impacts on the outcomes of each situation, then you are not railroading.
Yeah.
When you get into railroading, that's when you are basically making decisions for the players. Like, they walk into the town and it's like, you go to the inn and you walk in and they're like, well, I didn't want to go to the inn. And you're like, well, that's where you have to go. Now you're railroading. If you're forcing decisions on the players, then you're railroading. But if you're pushing a narrative forward, you're not.
Yeah, and there's some interesting chatter in the chat right now that I actually want to address. A few people asked, I think we got a question from in the chat, some comments earlier here. I'm just trying to make sure that I can see them here from, I think it was EVET and Cody talking about, oh, is it okay for me to railroad my players? And I'm telling you that I think you're using the term railroading incorrectly, because this is what railroading is. When you have a solution to the problem and your players propose a different solution that could work, but you throw up your hands and make the universe or the scenario say, you can't do that, because you have a specific way that it has to go. So if you have in your mind that you need to have an epic chase scene with the dragon, and the dragon is going to chase the players across the wilderness, and the players say, you know what, we're going to hide. And you say, no, you can't do that. You have to run. You have to do this chase scene that I played. And you might not say it out directly like that. You might try to engineer the situation to force that outcome, to force that chase scene. That's railroading. When you shut down the player's proposed solution. Railroading is not, this NPC is the king and is giving you a quest. That is not railroading. Railroading is not, you must take the ring to Mount Doom. That is not railroading. That is giving the players a quest. So make sure that you don't get your wires crossed, because having a clear objective is not railroading. And I do find that a lot of people are so paranoid about railroading that they don't give their players clear objectives. And you end up with this really muddied water where your players are being aimless. And because you didn't want to railroad them. But in not wanting to railroad them, you didn't give them any clear objectives or clear goals.
Yeah, I think that, like, I don't know, you as long as you're open-ended with your thought processes about each scenario that you present, and this also ties into just the entire DM style. One of the biggest lessons that every DM needs to learn is that you are not writing stories, you are writing scenarios. If you're writing a story, then you might be getting into railroading. If your story is the characters will enter this dungeon, they will go room by room and fight this battle, then have a conversation with this NPC, and then they will sneak through this corridor and fight the final boss in this room. And there's no other option. Well, now you're railroading. But if you just are open and you're like, here's a dungeon, here's the people that are inside, here are their goals and motivations. Let's see how the players mess it up. Now you're not railroading. You're just telling, you're just creating a scenario that the players get to tell their story and you get to orchestrate the outcomes.
Gonna be very specific though. If your dungeon looks like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is still not a railroad. That is linear. It is not a railroad. Okay? Like, it is not railroading to do that. It is super linear, but you're going scene, 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 scene. The players still have tons of choice in that. It could be a railroad if what you have there is that at the end of that railroad, you're going to trap your players in the Shadowfell. And if they don't take the bait and get trapped in the Shadowfell in room 5, your campaign falls apart. That would be railroading. But that whole progression. Now, if you give them a reason to go through the portal to the Shadowfell and tell them, yes, you know that you're going to go through this portal to the Shadowfell and you are going to be trapped there if you go through this portal. But hey, you know, you could solve this problem in another way, or you just don't have to make that choice. Then it's not railroading, right? Because a player can always say, no, I don't want to go through the portal to the Shadowfell. But if the portal to the Shadowfell closes behind them. So, you know, you do get those things for tricks and stuff like that. One of my most loathed bait and switches is I have played in 3 campaigns where the dungeon master asked us to make extensive backstories for our characters, and in the first session either teleported us 100 years in the future, shipwrecked us on another plane of existence, or got us trapped in the Underdark. And all 3 of those were circumstances where it didn't matter what my character's backstory was. I was never going to engage with those elements of my character's backstory because we got flung to some other dimension or some other place. So if you're going to, and it's fine to do a campaign like that, but if you're going to do that, tell your players during session 0 that you're going to do that and don't ask them for an extensive backstory.
Yeah. Next question is from Amdra. This question is, how would you go about getting information to your players when they have managed to miss your hints, clues, and giant glowing signs for 3 months of gameplay? My answer for this is oftentimes players will miss what you think is obvious because you as the DM will probably think something is 90% more obvious than the players will. And sometimes literally just telling them what it is you need them to do is necessary. A giant glowing sign, well, it doesn't mean much if it's on the main street of the city and you're not looking for it. And if that's the case and you're just trying to drop these hints, but they're not advertised well that they are hints or that they are pushing the players, then that might cause a problem. But I just think that it's be way, way, way more obvious than you think you should be, and your players still might miss a clue or 2.
The rule of thumb is that you should have 3 signposts. 1, because the first one the players will miss, the second one they will misinterpret, and the third one they might get it. And hopefully by then you've done it. And if your players are missing the giant signposts, perhaps now it's just the time to have a non-player character come up to them and say, hey guys, there's a problem and we've been missing this problem. And maybe you didn't realize it. We didn't either. Real sorry about that, but we need your help now. Again, it comes back to that idea of don't be so subtle that your players don't understand what's going on. And if your players are missing it and they have been for 3 months, it probably means that you just need to be like, you're going to feel like you're being obvious and beating them over the head with the books. They're going to be so thankful that they have a clear direction to go on.
Pestilent Ghoul asks, how do you handle a reoccurring boss or villain? We were chasing and battling the villain only for him to teleport away at 1 hit point. Felt deflating. How do you balance tension, catharsis, and overarching plot in a situation like this? Thanks, dudes. All right, so my answer for this is that there are so many other ways for the villain to taunt and be present to the party without showing up physically. Is your main villain a spellcaster? Well, guess what? Have the party fight simulacrums. Have the villain have a clone. If they're not a spellcaster, do they have a spellcaster like assistant? Then the same thing still applies. If there's no spellcasters involved, then maybe they have some way of delivering messages, or really, like, I guess a lot of my answers involve magic, but what villain doesn't have access to magic?
Well, a villain that doesn't have access to magic, here could be a cool thing. They fight the party, they get killed, and an evil necromancer raises them. And then they get killed again, and they become a death knight. And then they get killed again as a death knight and go to the 9 hells, where they are instantly promoted to a powerful demon. I think there was a campaign in Dragon magazine where I actually think there was a villain that was what happened to them. It was like the villain gets killed, gets raised from the dead, gets killed again, turns into a demon, gets killed again, and by the end of the campaign, they basically turned into like a demonic death knight. And it's really cool to see like this villain that has so much hatred, I think the reason why is that the villain has so much hatred for the players that other entities are using them as a pawn in a great game. But it's super cool. Like, the villain can die and come back. The inverse of this is, don't have put the villain in a position of power where killing them is not so simple. Where the players can confront the villain, but they're not going to be able to fight unless they're willing to die themselves.
One clever thing that I remember you did, Monty, in one of our campaigns is, there wasn't really necessarily a specific spell that you used, but we've talked about this before as well, that your villains can stretch the rules a little bit for the purposes of storytelling. They don't need to abide by the exact rules of the spell casting in the game.
Yeah.
One of Monty's main villains, he just kind of made up that he could communicate to us through statues. And throughout the world, there were various statues of this villain that had been constructed. And every time we stumbled across one, the statue the head would animate, and it would speak with us and taunt us and tell us how his devious plans were coming to fruition and we had no hope of stopping him. And this really got us amped up to fight this boss, but we couldn't, like, if we blew up a statue, all that happened is we weren't able to talk to him anymore in that moment. So it really did create this sort of impending doom. And you can use these small ideas, and going off of what Monty said, like, I feel like this is Resident Evil logic here, that if you kill the boss, they just come back as a more horrible monster, and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and there's a lot of monsters that have that built in. Someone in chat mentioned liches. I mean, liches be crazy, yo. So they have their phylacteries. Vampires work the same way. Like, if you read the stat block of a vampire, you gotta actually, like, tie it out in sunlight to actually destroy a vampire. Otherwise, it just won't work, right? And they can turn into gas, right? So it's really hard to actually kill a vampire.
You have to find their sleeping body.
Devils, when they are slain in the material plane, they reform in the 9 hells. right? So there's a lot of non-humanoid villains that can come back many times. There's also the other idea of the gray fox, and the way that I call this is or the Dread Pirate Roberts, right? That the villain can have a persona that is beyond the person who actually is wearing that persona. Like, so in The Princess Bride, the Dread Pirate Roberts is not one person. It is a succession of people that have been the Dread Pirate Roberts. Just like in Oblivion, there was the Gray Fox, who the Gray Fox was whoever was wearing the mask of the Gray Fox. So even if that person was killed, someone else would just put on the mask and they would be the Gray Fox. So that can be the way of it, right?
Esauce asks, how often should your PCs feel like their characters are genuinely in danger? They feel like they might die if they make dumb decisions. I think that depends on your campaign and your group, but I mean, I do think that there needs to be rises and falls in storytelling. This is a key part of storytelling in general, is oftentimes, like, if they're going on a quest, if they have been sent out on adventure, then build up to some dire situations, put consequences in front of them, choices that they're going to have to make that are challenging. But then once they're done a quest, give a session or two to let them rest from the story they just completed, learn about the new stories that are to come, have discussions, converse with NPCs, and these sessions, they should feel out of danger so that they can relax, they can recuperate, but then you start the build again. And it's very much like 3-4 session arcs is usually how I do this, with like the third and fourth session feeling the most dire, and then the first two feeling like a learning and building up.
Yeah, I think that you're right on the money, Kelly. Like, story pacing, a horror movie is not always at 10 out of 10 scare. It can't be. That's why so many horror movies actually have a lot of comic relief in them. You have to come down, because if you don't, it's like life. You cannot feel the highs of life unless you feel the lows.
Yeah. Dice Rolls and Doggos asks, what's your view on allowing characters to take spells that aren't normally on their spell list? For instance, an artillerist artificer would be super cool taking Eldritch Blast, but it isn't normally available to them. Monty, what do you think?
I think that this would be more permissible if more spells were better balanced.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me, and I will say it's something that I've never even thought to homebrew, because I'm worried that if I thought I knew what I was doing, I still have a chance of making something relatively imbalanced by accident.
Like there's, you know, what I think there's a very oft-quoted thing where, like, one of the biggest mistakes of 5th edition in terms of the spell design is that Eldritch Blast is not a class feature of the Warlock, and is a spell that makes people tempted to pilfer it, right? Like that's been quoted, like, and there's certain things where certain spells that could be class features and certain class features that could be spells, and vice versa, where you kind of go, is this spell really central to the identity of this class, or could we expand it? So I think that that's a question that you have to ask yourself, is like, are you doing it for flavor? And at the end of the day, if you're just doing it for flavor and you're doing it with your group, for role-playing purposes, it probably ain't going to make never mind to anybody. I think the biggest consideration is like, is this going to step on another player's toes at your table? And is this going to make more work for you as a DM in balancing encounters? And if nobody at your table is going to be hurt by it, and it's not going to make more work for you as a DM, it's probably okay.
I will say, though, and actually Chad is kind of mentioning this as well, that if you are looking to homebrew this, like, keep in mind that there are feats out there designed to allow you to do this. And if you are adhering to the rules, then it's like, yeah, at level 4, you can make the decision if you want Eldritch Blast and you can get it. So that is built into the system. So you don't really have to break the rules to gain a few spells that you might want because they allow that.
Yep.
Sam C asks, what necessary precautions would you have your players take to slay a god? Running Rime of the Frost Maiden for my home group, and I know the module says, spoilers by the way for Return of the Frost Maiden, she returns within a year of being killed, but I'm curious about a more permanent solution. Monty, you have a story, I think.
Okay, so I originally ran a heavily modified version of the Age of Worms campaign from Dungeon Magazine years ago. This is like a famous campaign of mine. And the way that I always did it is that, it always depends on the power level of the gods, right? Because in some campaign settings, the gods are completely, like, if you're looking at my current, like, Drakkenheim campaign setting, the gods are inscrutable and distant. And so the notion of killing a god is questionable. But in other campaign settings, gods are basically just super powerful entities that are something like that have some control over reality, but in a very specific way. Like, because that's the kind of the polytheistic pantheon sort of design of most gods in D&D. So for me, I think what I always did was that, gods have an absolute level of power over a certain area. And in my case, the god that my players were fighting was the god of death. So what my players had to do was they had to be immune to death, to kill death. And so the way that it worked was that one of the players in the party had to get the help of gold dragons so that the player could be elementally and spiritually fused to their armor, so that even if their body was destroyed, their armor could continue fighting on with their soul inside it because they would be dead. And then the rest of the party had to build a staff of resurrection. And the way that and literally the party had to constantly be resurrecting each other in the middle of the battle. And because because the god of death could just look at you and you're just dead. So they had to it was really meta. It was 3rd edition. It was super complex. So like for me, it's kind of like you got to employ some horseshoe theory of like, so Auril is the Frost Maiden. So she is absolute cold. So to defeat Auril, you have to defeat the notion of what it is to be cold. So like it's not about the opposite of cold. It's about the negation of coldness as a concept, because Auril embodies the concept of winter. So the opposite of winter is summer. The opposite of cold is heat. But that's too obvious. A god must be destroyed by the negation of the idea of winter, a negation of the idea of coldness.
I don't know how you do that, but
I don't either. But for me, that's where I also get into like the Harry Dresden sort of thing. Like when Dresden makes potions, he's like, this potion I'm using last week's coffee and in a forgotten ad for a newspaper. And it's like, in a world of magic, metaphorical concepts have real power. And what is a god in D&D but the incarnation of an idea?
Awesome. Moving on to the next question. Stone Angel 56. What sort of homebrew rules would you add to a campaign full of naval combat and adventure? Would you give them a special ship with certain benefits? So I actually have a story about this. My first campaign that I ever ran was for a group of friends who were really into Peter Pan and wanted a sort of piratey campaign. And so the mission started with them escaping from prison and commandeering a ship. That was their first big mission. They commandeered a ship. Throughout the world, I had ship ports that they could land in. And something that I did is I just took the standard rules that are in I mean, actually, one of the best places to find them all is Ghost of Saltmarsh, but you can also just find the rules and stats for various ships. So I gave them like a long ship, but the longship has its stats, and all that I did is I gave cool names for things that they could upgrade on the ship, which would do things like they could reinforce their hull with steel, and it gave them like +2 AC. Or they could get like a fire elemental furnace or something that helped power the ship that gave them additional speed boosts. Or they could actually acquire weapons for their ships as well. So they could attach a cannon or like a ballista, and this allowed players to man those while they were in ship combat. And so when ship combat would break out, you could have somebody driving the ship so they could move or flank or crash into other ships, and then people could man the various other positions. We usually had a wizard up in the crow's nest who was throwing fireballs. So just by simply doing some pretty standard stuff, like you take a regular ship and you say +1 to this, +2 to this, you can improve it. It gives characters the sense that they now have their own ship. I let them name it. I think they named it the Friend Ship.
I remember that one.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Monty had a shield.
Fun Ship Gunship.
Oh yes, you got a second ship called the Fun Ship Gunship, which you loaded with all the weapons, and you had a shield guardian whose name was RM80. Yes. Which I thought was hilarious. So
our matey.
So those are some of the great stories from our pirate campaign, and it was really simple, but it gave the players a way to invest in their ship. They got to customize it, describe how they were attaching these things and what they looked like, and they really got to take a regular old wooden ship, and through their descriptions and a simple +2 to AC or something like that, they got to really feel like their ship came alive as their own entity that they got to be in command of.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun, and I do remember some of the early ship battles that we did in that campaign, where you were very surprised at the long ranges of spells and how Sleet Storm and invisibility and water breathing could be used to storm the ships instead of shooting across them. So my only advice to you is what Kelly struggled with at first was he had me as a player, and my immediate thought was, how do I use my spells to break the ship to ship combat and turn it back into turn this into something else, right? Because the question always is what do you do when the wizard fireballs the boat? Yeah, it was a good lesson. The other fun stunt, I know that we're kind of on a tangent here, but the other fun stunt that Monty pulled that somehow I just didn't think of is you bought 10 cannons for the ship, and I was like, okay, cool, you can put 5 on each side, and you were like, well, how do we get them on the ship? And I'm like, well, they're on wheels. And so the next time you were in a ship combat, Monty was just like, wheel all the cannons to the left side. Right. I remember this. I was like, we're putting all the cannons on the same side of the ship. And I remember how like you were like, wait, that's not balanced. Yeah. But you have to fire them out of both sides. And I'm like, no, people and I remember being like, no, people did that. Like,
yeah. And I couldn't logic my way out of it. And I was like, that is completely reasonable based on everything that has been said. So sure. And then you just decimated the other ship because they had less cannons than you now. And you tore them apart.
Leave it to me to find a way to double the damage output.
My first time being a DM with Monty as a player made me learn how to be a DM really quickly, because Monty was excellent at poking holes in anything that I presented. And he still is. So it's what he does, and he's good at it.
Yep.
Next question is from Brian. I'm going to be taking over as DM for a friend's group. I'm going to be the new guy coming in with little knowledge of their old campaign. How do I balance giving them a new campaign that's my own, but honoring their previous adventures?
I have a question about this question first that I don't understand yet. Are you taking over the existing campaign with the existing characters in the same world, or are you starting brand new? Because if you're taking over the existing characters in the existing world with the existing stuff, that's hard. I wouldn't do that. I like, if someone asked me to do that, my answer would be no. I'm not doing that. If I'm running a campaign, you're making new characters. So And I would say you could remake the same character at level 1 if you want to. So if that's what you're doing, good luck, because I that's not something that I would do myself.
Yeah, if you are coming into an existing campaign without any knowledge of the existing campaign, then you need to have knowledge in order to take over that story. But if it's a brand new story, then you are kind of open to just do whatever you want. Either way, if you are taking over a group, I would have a long conversation with the current DM who's retiring and ask what is essential about, like, if it's in the same world and that's the question, then ask the other DM, like, what are the important factors of your world that I need to take into account?
Yeah, because if you're doing a campaign where it's like, where they're making new characters but in the same world like 20 years later, then that's cool. Like, that would be really cool. That I think that's a good middle ground. But I don't know if I would. But if I was inheriting the same characters in the same world, I would almost certainly start a new story. I would worry that you would get into that whole thing when the trilogy's halfway through and they switch directors. Like, that's kind of the thing that I would worry about there.
We have one. I think this is probably the last one before we move on to the Drakkenheim questions. But
cool.
Here we have, in your streams, there are many different flavors of D&D that have been exhibited. Any advice on transitioning between story types with a particular note on maintaining immersion while keeping it fresh? I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk about Drakkenheim a little bit here with this idea. I know that I'm not the one DMing Drakkenheim, but just from writing and observing, I think an important note is you can come up with a overarching theme that is open-ended in its implications of what it could mean for D&D. In the case of Drakkenheim, this is delirium. You have a bunch of different scenarios, but delirium is just magical essence solidified. So really, what you can do is just say, well, I have this overarching idea. There's like a magical leak in the world or something like that, whatever you want to come up with. But it could have several different implications. So what that ends up doing for you is you have a running theme, something that is constant to make it feel like it's part of the same world. But each story can be different because delirium could create a giant Tarrasque, or it could create a army of vampires, or it could create a tear in the fabric of reality that lets all the demon lords through at once. You can do whatever you want. You just need to kind of, I like the idea of just having something happen in your campaign that then allows you to branch out in all these different ways, that creates unity, but allows you to explore different vibes with each adventure. Monty, I'll kind of ask you to jump on there and give your advice as the DM of the campaign.
I think the first thing would be is that with having multiple genres acting at the same time, you're right, Kelly, that you want to have a touchstone that binds it all together, right? A mechanic or something that is unifying that you can keep coming back to. Like, I like to say one of my favorite games of all time is Portal. And Portal is an action, puzzle, horror, comedy. And Portal it brings all those genres together in one wonderful mix. It's artistry. And for me personally, I try to make my D&D games action, puzzle, horror comedies. For me, Portal is like the gold standard of the type of storytelling that I love. Where and I would just say that, like, read more genre fiction, like read more books, read more things, and see how authors do it in their books, because it's really interesting how you can build tension and use that notion of the up and down, right? One of the ways that you can do this is thinking about story structure as this. It's the touchstone is the normal world, right? So you can always go back to things, life being normal, and then something happens that makes it weird, or that makes it scary, or that makes it weird, because our lives, real life does not have a genre except horror. No, real Real life is the worst form of cosmic horror. But
what you are about to see is a nightmare. It's my life.
Yeah,
it's just my life.
One of my favorite quotes is from Samuel Beckett, or maybe it's Harold Pinter. His birth was the death of him. And but you know, that's how it is. So I think that I think that it, as Kelly said, have a touchstone and jump up and down. If you're gonna immediately, the hardest thing to do is turn on a dime from horror to comedy, especially in an improv game. And really, you might only be able to turn from horror to comedy if you have good players. And that's the other side of the coin, is that generally speaking, the players are almost always going to pull you towards comedy and shenanigans. So you don't need to actually do that much. You just need to be the stoic face of the horror, because your players are going to take it there. And if you just let them hold the ball, they'll do it. Like, oftentimes it can be really surprising how I find, especially playing with Kelly, Jill, and Joe, have their finger on the pulse of the tone of the game in a way that I don't even think I do. Like, all of a sudden, like, and again, this is something that comes from playing D&D together with the same people for years, and everybody being on a wavelength of creativity. We're like, you know, in our stream earlier this week, right? Like, we got there. Like, I felt in that moment when in the stream, like, it was like, oh, this is a tension horror investigation, and everybody's on board with this. And like, everybody was doing the things, the players were playing into the genre, and that's a gift. Unfortunately, I don't know how to make that happen. Like, I just, like, the advice is get better players, but like, but so I don't yet know how to make that, but I think that the way you make it is you got to play together with people that you love and trust, right? Like, I think that's the biggest thing. If you have really good friends who you trust, who you resonate with creatively, I view my players as creative collaborators. So that gives me an ability, I know and I trust that when I put down something, Kelly, Jill, and Joe are probably going to pick it up, and that balance exists there. So the immersion, play with the same people for a long time, and I will just say a play group should be something that gets better with age. You know, it's one of those things where I found quite recently where, like, I love running one shots, but like, I've really started to notice like the aged wine / like, you know, well-aged ribeye effect of playing with the same people consistently for several years. It's really, it is a thing, and I don't think people realize it. That's why Critical Role is so good, because those people have been playing, like, not only are they professional actors, but they have been playing together for a long time.
Moving on to some Drakkenheim questions. We have one from Troy. How challenging was it to balance your custom monsters, encounters, and mechanics in a published professional setting? And what were some great tools you used to accomplish this?
Awesome question.
One of my favorite practices that Monty and I ended up doing was creating monsters. Was actually, Monty and I had a monster creation day where I think we busted out like 6-7 different awesome monsters. And it was a really fun practice. What we did is we would start with what the monster was, and we would have a quick discussion about what we imagined it doing. Like, what were we would just write down point form notes. Like, this monster spits acid, has spines on its back, and can teleport. And then what we would do is we would look up every monster we could find that had abilities that involved those elements. Like, okay, what else spits acid? What else has spines? And what else can teleport? And we cherry picked our favorite abilities from other monsters. We would change a word or two, or the damage type, or the amount of damage based on the challenge rating. And then we would patchwork it together, give it a new name and a few extra features to really make it feel complete. And you end up with a completely new monster. And that was actually one of the things that I found in the book was for the published professional setting, we didn't want to mess around. And part of my brain was like, well, I can't steal everything because they're going to know I stole it. But the fact is, you can still steal everything because the rules are there. And if you're changing the name of like, just because something says this creature spits acid and does 2d6 damage and they have to make a constitution saving throw or they get poisoned, I don't know, whatever. That's not restricted to that monster. That's just a use of the rules.
And I will clarify, one of the ways that you make sure that you're doing your due diligence is you stick to the OGL. So we use the open game license monsters as a resource when we're borrowing mechanics. But because those are given to authors, like you are allowed to go into the open game license, the system reference document of the basic rules, and you can pull things out. And so for me, the tools that I use are, do your homework, look at the existing monsters, look at the wording, because here's a very specific thing. There are dozens of monsters in D&D that have a reach attack that grabs you, and the wording has been done. So that is the airtight wording that people are looking for. And more so than just borrowing the mechanics, the reason why you want to use the wording of existing monsters and spells is because it aids in comprehension for the reader, right? When the reader sees a monster that has long tentacle arms, they expect that monster is going to grab and restrain. And they expect the wording of that because that's the way our brains are wired. So if you have a tentacle monster that is going to grab somebody and you use a wording that isn't the wording that other tentacle monsters use when they grab people, that's actually a bad thing. So you want to make sure in a published product that you are being consistent with the way the rules and mechanics are presented, and that you research it very, very carefully and understand. So like for us, it is about reading. Like we read a lot of the core rules, learning how they're presented, learning how they're laid out. You don't always get it right. And I will say that the core rules don't always do it the best way, but sometimes you do it the way the core rules do it, because the comprehension is built in. So there were several mechanics that we were like, oh, we could do this in a completely different way. But part of the reason why delirium contamination works based on the exhaustion mechanic is everybody already knows how exhaustion works. So even though we essentially use a very similar set of wording to the way exhaustion is worded, we're using that because that way I can say, oh, contamination is like exhaustion. And that is way fewer words than having to say contamination works in levels. A creature gains a level whenever this happens, and like you just know immediately, right? But then I can just add the tack on contamination works like exhaustion, but effects that will remove exhaustion don't work on contamination. And that's the key exception that you need to know. The effects have different things. So that's I think a big thing. I will also say that we had the privilege of speaking with other authors and learning from them and getting lots of feedback from them. We have the privilege of working with an editor. And the biggest thing is that we're collaborators. Like Kelly and I are a partnership. So, when push comes to shove, the two of us can sit down, bust out the dice, and actually do play testing on the spot. Like we can be like, does this work? I don't know. Let's try it. And that's the other big tool that we have the advantage of, is that we playtest, right? We playtest on stream. If you watched Untold Tales, you were watching us playtesting.
Yeah. Ron, it's Aaron. I just really wanted to say Ron, asks, was wondering if I could run the book as a first-time DM and with most likely newbie players. I vote yes. I do think that this is a very broad campaign. Our hope is that we have given you all the tools that you would ever need in order to run it. If you have a creative mind and are ready to be a DM, I think Drakkenheim is a great place to start. And I hope that it's a book that new DMs will be excited to run for new players.
I think that Kelly and I worked really hard on making this an accessible book. It is a bit of an albatross your first time out. I think that you would benefit from running one of the starter sets first if it was your absolute first time DMing, because I and with a new group, but you could do it. for sure. You're going to feel like diving in the deep end, because I think the biggest thing that Drakkenheim does ask of you is we ask you to exercise your judgment and be prepared for unexpected things. So having a little bit of experience on your belt of how your players act with when they can respond to things is helpful.
I really like this next question from Bradley. Will this book be suitable for those who don't follow the show? I love your D&D content, but have never tuned into any of the Drakkenheim games. I think that's absolutely fine, and actually might be a benefit for you, because there's going to be a lot of people playing this campaign who have watched the show, and this might subvert their expectations a bit because of the way we're presenting the book. If you have never watched Drakkenheim, you get to come in here fresh without any preconceived notions about the 5 factions, about the monsters. I won't go any further than that, but you won't be already attached to certain elements of the game, which will allow you to be more free flowing with the open nature of the campaign that we're presenting.
And I will also say is that you don't have to run the whole campaign. If you want to just use pieces of it, you totally can. And this applies both to Aaron's question as well. If you just want to run the Rat's Nest as a one-shot, go for it. That's easy. This is a book that is actually very easy to get ripped apart. Hopefully not by critics, but by you as a dungeon master, in that the parts of it, like if you just want to say, hey, you know what, this Eldritch Contamination mechanic is awesome, I'm just going to use it in my own campaign. Go for it. I love these new spells. I love these new monsters. I'm just going to use them. Yeah, perfect. I love these magic items. Use them. You know what? I was thinking of running a crazy adventure involving a abandoned castle. Just use Castle Draken, right? We've tried to make a lot of cool environments that aren't traditional dungeons. We have traditional dungeons, but if you want adventure environments that are more like a twisted version of an urban environment, this book is just great because really fundamentally you can run it as one shots. You'll have to change the motivations and the reasons for going to some of the adventure sites, but you'll be able to and move them around, but you could just use the maps.
Next question is from Jay Caspian. I wonder if they took Caspian from our show or if that's just a coincidence. But anyway, Jay Caspian asks, how much experience should players have when coming to this campaign? Could I run this with 3 to 4 new people, or should the players have more experience? I think you're fine running it for new players. I don't think any experience is needed. I will say that this is a more challenging campaign. And, but I will counter that by saying that many people who have been running 5e campaigns have commented that there isn't enough of a challenge in 5th edition. And so we have implemented ways that this is kind of a scary campaign. It will take careful thinking and planning from your player characters in order to survive the city. But that doesn't mean that they need to be experienced. Again, the same thing applies here. A brand new group is now going to learn about careful planning and thinking as they venture forward. Yeah. The same way that even an experienced group might be like, oh, my usual run and gun tactics are not working. So I think it's open.
I also think that the book ramps up really elegantly. In my opinion, the Rat's Nest is a dead simple dungeon. It is such an easy dungeon to run. It is the Rat's Nest is a goblin cave in disguise, right? Some of the other early, we've actually added a couple other early adventure sites that are very, hopefully we'll get them in the book, if we get the page count for it, that are also like really easy dungeons. So like if you are a new dungeon master, I personally think I'm really proud of the Rat's Nest. I think the Rat's Nest is a really well written module for a new dungeon master. Personally, like if you read Cragmaw Cave, that first goblin cave in Lost Mines of Phandelver, you can run the Rat's Nest.
Yeah,
for sure, 100%. Right? Because the campaign. I think a lot of people that ask these questions about new players and new DMs are thinking about the campaign when it was at at the high levels, and the faction intrigue was in full spin. And one of the things that we've really done with the Drakkenheim book is we've made that first 5 levels a lot meatier than it was before. So in the original show, the player characters got to the clock tower really early in the show. Like that was something that happened in like episode 7.
Yeah, I think it was.
The way we've restructured is that claiming the clock tower is like the midpoint of the campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake asks, without spoiling anything or giving too much away, what do you dudes feel is the most significant deviation of the Kickstarter Drakkenheim from the streamed version, excluding the fact that Sebastian Veo and Pluto won't be the PCs?
Well, we just kind of answered that one there. I think that's a big one. But do you have another thought, Kelly?
I mean, one answer, I know that it's not listed in the Sebastian Veo and Pluto here, but I think that something that occurred in the in the live stream was that the Ratlings became a very prominent character, a very prominent presence, and that was because of character choices. In the book, there are other monsters that were intended to take the place of higher level adventures. We've introduced mutated dregs that roam the city. The gnolls have a potential of being a bigger threat. So one thing that I think deviates from the live stream is the monsters are actually open-ended. Your players' choices are going to determine what the monsters end up becoming. But in the original campaign, the choices that were made led to the Ratlings being very prominent. But the Ratlings are in the beginning of the adventure, and they're detailed with options to have them grow. But they're not throughout the entire campaign.
Yeah. If you are hoping to recreate the Ratling arc that the original show had, you're really going to have to work for that and hope that your players make the same decisions my players did, because we don't expect that to happen. Especially for groups that haven't watched the show, I think it's very unlikely to happen. It's hard to replicate.
I'm imagining that for groups that haven't watched the show, very prominent characters from the show, I'm trying not to give spoilers here, very prominent monster characters from the show will not survive the first few sessions for those of you who do not watch the campaign. And if you are a DM who has watched the campaign, you might need to let go of the idea that character will not get killed by your player characters, because they might kill him early.
I'll also say that the other deviation is that the horror is way higher.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that the it's like, I think one of the big reasons for that is we've got some fan art of the Rat Prince in a dress that looks like a cutesy, like it's beautiful fan art. I love, like, there's some cute looking artwork of the Rat Prince, but Marius's art of the Rat Prince is scary. Like that is not a creature that you want to meet in a dark alley in a scary city. Like,
no, let alone try to put a dress on it and pretend that it's something other than what it is.
But and even some other characters who were monsters, really, and became NPCs. They're much more monstrous than they were before. I also think, just in general, like, the factions are the identity of the factions is really clear now as well. Like, in the original, I think a big deviation from the original campaign is, in the original campaign, the faction leaders of the Hooded Lanterns and the Silver Order, Theodore Marshall and Elias Drexel, they were challenge rating 10, and they were not legendary characters. In the new book, Theodore Marshall and Elias Drexel are some badass, we buffed them so much. And I really hope your players don't do what Pluto Jackson did and challenge Theodore Marshall to a duel, because
It's not going to go well.
Ooh, that's not going to go well.
I want to add one thing in that I think I just really love this aspect about the book, and I do want to talk about it. It kind of piggybacking off my last point about being okay with certain monster characters not being prominent. I think equally be excited to have some of the other key monsters. Like we have, I'm going to throw out some names there. Lord of the Feast or the Crimson Countess could end up being prominent villains in your campaign based on your player choices. And rather than holding yourself to the idea that it needs to be the Rat Prince, I think that there's some really cool campaigns waiting out there where the Lord of the Feast poses a problem until the end of the game. Mm-hmm. The Executioner might pose a major threat in the end of the campaign. I don't know, like, am I missing anybody? Queen Lenore, there's Big Linda.
There's tons of cool stuff.
Yeah. So be open to the possibility that other monsters could take that spotlight and see what your players end up doing with these monsters and raise the stakes for your players with them.
I actually want to come to this question here that I feel talking about other monsters. Arctic Wolf asked a question of what creatures from the wider world, vampires, liches, evil dragons, etc., would be drawn to Drakkenheim as a place of power. What if a vampire or evil dragon set up as a base of operation within the walls? And my question to you is very simple. What makes you think they haven't?
Yeah, I very much actually want to encourage with this question. I love this question. What creatures from the wider world might be drawn to Drakkenheim? Whatever you want. And
all I'm going to say is we have not met the Academy Directorate.
Wait, what?
The directors of the Amethyst Academy, the Archmages.
You wrote that section. I didn't read it.
That
was not on my read list. You might be in for
some surprises there as to who is on the upper echelons of the Amethyst Academy. But who knows who might be members of the other factions? Who knows what other creatures could dwell within those factions? How do you know that there is not a vampire in the Queen's Men? How do you know that there is not other allies? Now, the thing is that one of the other things to know is that there are dragons in Drakkenheim. It's called Drakkenheim for a reason, and so there are some cool things there. One of the things that I will say though is so that people are aware is that being an undead creature does not make you immune to contamination. This is the thing that I think surprises a lot of people, is that undead creatures, constructs, nothing is resistant. There is no thing that, aside from an already contaminated creature, that is immune to contamination innately. So if an evil dragon wanted to set up shop in Drakkenheim, it's going to have to figure out how to survive the contamination itself. And the idea of a delirium contaminated mutated dragon that went into Drakkenheim thinking it was going to set up shop and ended up being corrupted by delirium, that's pretty scary.
Yeah. And I also want to say that there's a lot of open space in Drakkenheim. We have great adventure sites, but for a creative DM out there, if you wanted to write a mini adventure that involved a vampire who is residing in Drakkenheim and you have a cool idea on what they might be doing there, I encourage you to add your own adventure sites to the module, and anything goes. The fact is, like, Monty and I have used Delirium to just grab our favorite monsters out of the book. You can take a favorite monster, throw the lore away, and just turn it into a Delirium mutation.
Can I reveal a very huge inspiration for me for Delirium?
Yeah.
Did you ever watch Smallville?
Yes.
Do you know how Kryptonite in Smallville was basically magic space rocks that could do whatever the story needed it to do?
Yeah.
That's basically what Delirium is. Like metaphorically speaking, like, because magic crystals in stories do what the plot demands them do. That's the point of them. And so Delirium, like, obviously there's decisions, there's real rules to the way that it works, there's real consistency in how it manifests, but like Delirium is like obviously I'm not going to try to involve spoilers in this, but like Delirium is fundamentally me being like, I like magic space rocks that let me do whatever I want. As a storyteller and as a DM, right? Having space rocks that have unknown and perhaps unknowable properties is an excuse for you as a storyteller to whip up whatever cool monsters your imagination can conjure and give a plausible explanation for why that monster is there and not somewhere else. Right? It's easy. It's a convenient. It's actually kind of lazy storytelling, but it works really, really well. And so it's an invitation to say, like, you know, if you're inspired and you are like, yeah, I want Delirium to do whatever I want it to do, then it does. But the key thing to use space rocks in your story is that, like, the boundary that is difficult, and this is the hardest one, is that space rocks do what the dungeon master decides they do and not what the players logically conclude it should be able to do. Space rocks do not obey the laws of physics, and they do not obey the laws of logic. They obey the laws of plot. So if your players get crafty with them and want to be reasonable with them, no, Delirium is the antithesis of reason. Delirium is the antithesis of logic. It says Delirium is a reminder that the idea of logic itself is a convenient story humans tell themselves when they try to convince themselves that the world makes sense. Delirium says, no, you think your world makes sense? It doesn't.
Sky asks, have you included any mechanics for characters in the book, such as spells, background subclasses, or generally any other options available to player characters? This being our first book, this is a campaign module before anything else. There are three things that players will be distinctly interested in specifically, but most of them involve the character creation process to get you ready for the campaign. We did not include any subclasses or new classes or anything like that, but we do have backgrounds. There are backgrounds specifically designed to be Drakkenheim focused backgrounds. We've also introduced a new system called personal quests, where every player chooses one of our 12 personal quests, or there are also rules to help you make your own. And the personal quests directly tie you into one of the many plots within Drakkenheim, so that your characters are now, if you choose a background and a personal quest, you are now tied into the elements of the campaign so that you get to be the heroes in the spotlight. The personal quest gives each player the reason why they are there. And that's very helpful and necessary. There's a reason they're in Drakkenheim, and there's a reason they're going to stay in Drakkenheim. And that's what the personal quests do. The backgrounds add some flavor and context and kind of allude to the wider world in interesting ways. And we're also hoping to have a section. It's a smaller section, but it includes the lore of the world in terms of how it responds to the various different people who live in the world. Now, we're very open-ended with that as well. So we get questions all the time, like, how do druids fit in? How do artificers fit in? How do clerics fit in? Do I have to be a member of the Sacred Flame or the Falling Fire? The answer to all of those is really, you can do what works best for you and your group. We have the lore section should cover the logic of the way the world works, and you can choose whether or not you want to play into the systems that are in place or against them. Either way, you're going to come up with a compelling character. So those are the tools we've given you for character creation, but I will add as a final note, we hope this isn't the last book we make. So if you're looking for more player options, Monty and I have a list of brainstorm ideas for future projects that hopefully will please all of our Drakkenheim players in the future. Anything to add?
I also think we also have new magic items and spells.
Yes.
And that are very specific to the world. So there'll be fun things. Doing stuff like a subclass, we talked a lot about it. Like, we didn't want subclasses to overshadow the adventure. And I feel like if we did subclasses, people like mixing subclasses with an adventure is tricky, and it tends to dilute the product that is the book itself, in my opinion.
From a business perspective, we had to something that I learned is I just thought that Monty and I were going to write whatever the heck we wanted, and it was all going to be made into a book. But then I learned that page count and cost are very important things when you're manufacturing a book. So the decision was made that we would rather spend the pages on this campaign module, making sure the campaign section of it is as built up as possible and fluent and easy to run. At the end of the day, we would rather spend a totally separate page count on new subclasses, maybe a new class, even more new spells and magic items. Like that's something that I would be really keen to do in the future. But we wanted to reserve that page count for the most important aspect, which is running Dungeons of Drakkenheim.
Yeah. And that actually fits into our next question, where Cormac asks, is there anything that you would have liked to have included, but had to leave at cut for whatever reason? We would have loved to have done subclasses. We would have loved to have done feats. We have about 12 other adventure sites so basically we got to a point when we were putting the book together where we were like, okay, what adventure sites have we written are core to this adventure, and which ones are we going to say these are going to have to be stretch goals? So it ended up that we had, I think we developed about 12. We developed a whole bunch of new adventure sites, and I think we ended up saying that like 6 of them were definitely going in, and it was like 2 of them were definitely going in, 6 of them are going to be stretch goals, and there's like 4 that were like, you know what, we're just going to have to wait for like we might do an Untold Tales of Drakkenheim where we add more adventure sites. Was there something that you thought particular too, Kelly?
I mean, I think this might build hype for something that won't happen for years, but Monty and I also are sitting on a half-baked brand new class that we've been theorizing about for the better part of a couple years, and it's not ready at all. But it's something that I think really fits into Drakkenheim. I'm excited to explore our new class, our new subclasses.
Yeah. The whether or not we were going to put that new class in this book was under consideration for a really long time. Yeah, but building a new class is really hard. It's probably one of the hardest things you can do.
Somebody asked. So somebody just said here, more books in the future. And I do want to say again, like that is the hope, but that is not, there's nothing official. If this Kickstarter goes well, so all of you out there who are watching this, if this Kickstarter goes well, then we'll probably do more. If it doesn't go well, then we'll see what we can pull up. But the support is going to be important. But we have a lot of ideas. We have ideas to add more adventure sites in another book, or do a player-focused book, or a book of like magic items and spells could happen. A book of the wider world could happen. So we'll see what happens. Which elements of the book are you most proud of at this point?
Yep.
Okay. Which elements of the book are you most proud of at this point? Are there any particular areas you think still need work ahead of the next step in development?
I'm really proud of delirium contamination.
Yeah.
I'm also really proud of our prose. Our descriptions in this book are long.
I'm shooting my own horn.
Some of them are long, but we realize that they deserve it.
So Monty and I might be enamored in our own writing, but something really wonderful happened during the writing process. Monty and I have worked together, obviously, for years, but we've never written a book together. And something that happened is when him and I tackled sections together, he would write beautiful descriptive text. I would write beautiful descriptive text. We would take the best elements of those beautiful descriptive texts, flesh them out, and meld them together. And there were sections that I would read afterwards and be like, neither of our brains could have written this, but together we did somehow. And it made me really proud. I was really proud. This is a weird one, but when you read the description of the interior of the cathedral, I was so happy with the description of I think we read it out loud in one of our live streams. But I love some of the descriptions made me so happy. I will also say I had such a blast creating monsters that I am really proud of some of the monsters that we've created. I'm excited for the Warp Witch. And I'm excited for the Delirium Dregs and the new Lord of the Feast, the new and improved.
Oh, yeah.
Really proud of some of those.
To answer the second part of the question is, what do you think needs more development? I think the spells probably will be a focus if we do a playtest round, just to get the numbers right. The monster stats might need to get the numbers right. And I think the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to for feedback as we develop is just making sure that everything is clear and that people don't have a heart attack when they see some of the challenge ratings of the monsters. Because, like, there's some scenarios in here that would make level 20 characters want to run. And we ask you to do them when you're not level 20.
Yeah, one of the themes in the book is you're going to have to ally with the factions because some of the challenges you're not going to succeed on unless you have a party of 20 people, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's take some questions from chat. Gav asks, what's your approach to dealing with the kinds of instant death traps central to older game modules when adapting them? I'm thinking of the Whispering Cairn as an example.
You can have an instant death trap as long as it's clear that it will instantly kill you. And that it is a choice of the player to engage with it, not a random thing that can happen.
Yeah, accidentally killing your player when they had no idea that was a possibility sucks. But if you have a chest, or actually, I'm going to use one of Monty's examples. If you have 3 chests in a room and a scripture that basically implies that opening the wrong chest will suck you into a dimension of fire where you die horribly, and that is well broadcast in the description, and it's like, here's the riddle, choose the chest, but if you fail, you die. That didn't really rhyme, but that's the riddle. No, but broadcasting that then allows the players to say, well, I bet there's something awesome in one of these chests. Do we want to risk it? And it still is really interesting. And yeah, they might walk right by the chest, but then that's their choice and they miss out on the treasure as well. And by presenting it as a choice to engage, their death is in their hands.
Yeah.
What else we got? Will the book have advice about role-playing the leaders of the factions? No idea how I would role-play the Queen of Thieves. Bonus question, is Drakkenheim cake a lie? The cake is always a lie. And yes, there are massive sections of this book for the leaders of the factions.
All the faction leaders have a full section on their role-playing traits. And then not only that, there are personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws for the faction as a whole. So the faction leader doubles down in that they dip into both their own unique role-playing traits and the faction as a whole. And the way we've written the role-playing traits for the faction leaders is that you can say them to yourself, right? So one of the Queen of Thieves' flaw is, I expect everyone to betray me, and I can't wait until they try. I would love to see the look on their faces when they fail. And so that, her flaw is that she doesn't trust anybody, but you also have a great quotation that if you want to bring that, like, trot that out in a role-playing moment, you can use that too. So that's the way that we kind of constructed the role-playing traits for the faction leaders.
I like this question. How much of the world up to the end of campaign did you create before playing Drakkenheim, and how much did the players create?
5 pages. 5 pages of rough notes.
When we started the campaign?
Yeah, like I had a map of Drakkenheim. I had a list of the locations. I had the note. the rat's nest was a photo of the Dwarven Forge setup with arrows in Photoshop over it with like ratlings. Anyone running Drakkenheim with this book is working with like a billion times more than what I did running the original campaign. Like, I had a list of names, I had like rosters of the faction leaders. It was not a lot, and the players didn't have a lot either. Like, so much more happens at the table, you know. But I will come out and say that like that was 5 pages of prep, like of like really good stuff that I gave to the players, but then like notes and notes and notes and lists and reams of stuff. So like I probably put about 40 to 50 hours of work before the campaign started into preparing the whole thing. And it was a concept and idea that I'd had a lot for a long time. And nowadays, because I do this full time, I have the benefit of like, I can actually put in an hour or 2 of game prep for every hour that we play. So like when you watch a live stream campaign by, you just remember that like a lot of live streams like ours, like we do this full time. Like Kelly and I, this is what we do for now. So we have a benefit of being able to use our free time towards doing this, which is a tricky balance, right? I will hold yourself to that standard.
Yeah, it's very important. Because like, I don't know, even when I run home games, I run off of like point form notes that are like half a page, and I just figure it out. But we've given you a lot of tools. I will also say, to answer my own version of that question, a fact that I think I always find very fun: Caspia only exists as it is told by Joe.
Yep.
Caspia was nothing. Joe, through the campaign, creates what Caspia is. And by the time you meet Jupiter Jones and Saul Jackson and the rest of the Caspians, it was because of the way that Joe just presented Pluto and the way that he brought Caspia to life through his character, made that whole through line. So now, like when we detailed Caspia, we actually brought Joe in to give us his notes on Caspia so that we can incorporate it, and it's so fun. I love that. That's Joe's little treat for everybody.
Do you want to see something really funny? These are some of my prep notes from the game last night.
Nice. I like that you also redacted certain things.
Yeah, just with some redactions in there. But like, it was literally, I just wrote the names down. Like, if you write a list of names, you have a lot of your prep done.
Yeah. Question: are you guys taking care of yourselves while making your book? Don't burn yourselves out. AC, I am definitely not taking care of myself. Thanks for asking. Next question.
I am not okay.
I am not okay.
Yep.
Watched a lot of Bo Burnham this week.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're doing all right. We're in the cool down period, but there was a burn. There was a lot of effort that went in.
Oh yeah.
Can you reveal any of the swag of the Kickstarter? Can we?
No,
not really.
You'll find out on Monday. We can't. We're gonna have it's all gonna be there on Monday. It's I know it's a weekend of waiting, but we can't yet.
Here's what I will tell you: if I wasn't making the project, I would buy the top tier pledge because I love everything. I'm so excited. I think it's a lot for like you get a lot.
I will say there's a lot of really cool practical swag.
Yeah.
I think what we can say is there is a DM screen and there is a fabric map of the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's a bundle pledge where you get all that and lots of other cool stuff. And it's I think it's a really good deal. Yeah.
This is an interesting question. We get this a lot, and I want to answer this. What advice do you give for races in Drakkenheim? I know you prefer humans, and your Untold have had gnomes and more. We were thinking of putting the races into the book and defining them, but we actually decided to just put in a simple statement that this isn't like your normal D&D world where dwarves have kingdoms and elves have kingdoms. We allude to the fact, if you're watching Shadows of Drakkenheim, there is the illusion of the world used to be a classic D&D setting, but now everything is mixed. We don't bring it's a Drakkenheim and Westamar and all of the world that we have created is a problem of provinces and continents, not a problem of races. Any race can fit in anywhere, and we don't have special rules to tell you where the races come from, because although we are human centric in the world, any race can pop up anywhere and it's not weird. Nobody's like, oh man, is that a UNT pureblood? What are they doing here? Like, it's like, oh, we've seen them, a few of them around. There's one now.
And the lore justification for it is that throughout the history of, particularly when the Sorcerer Kings ruled, they took interest in gaining more sorceress power by mixing their bloodlines with magical creatures. And so that's why the world has tieflings and Azamar and Dragonborn. That's the result of lineages of people trying to gain magical abilities by mixing by mingling humans with celestials and other beings. So for me, like that's a very natural explanation. There's a part of me that has resisted the urge to make Drakkenheim a kitchen sink setting where every single fantasy lineage and every single fantasy creature is there. One of the ones that I get asked a lot is, what are Warforged in the world of Drakkenheim? And to me, Warforged in the world of Drakkenheim are just golems. They're just they're just, every Warforged is a unique creation. It was made by some sort of wizard at some point, but it's not like Eberron where Warforged were made en masse and deployed in war. So it wouldn't even be correct to call a Warforged in the context of the world of Drakkenheim, because they were not forged for war necessarily, right? So that's an example of that. Like, and you could say that anything is the result of delirium or a magical experiment. Maybe we'll go further with that, but like for me, I like the delirium to be the source of weirdness in the world, and the rest of the world is quite mundane by comparison.
I also think it's important that players shouldn't feel restricted or confused about how they fit in. If you want to play Tabaxi Ranger, then like Monty had no idea that Tabaxi were in the world until Jill said, I would like to play a Tabaxi Ranger. And then Monty built in, there were a couple other Tabaxis that we ran into. But besides that, it's not like Veo was an oddball. She was just a Tabaxi that lived in Drakkenheim.
Yeah. I don't see the need to make a big deal out of it.
Here's another question. Are there any monsters in D&D 5e that you feel are disappointing mechanically when compared to their lore or even mythological origin, if they have them?
We made a video called Weakest Epic Level Monsters.
Yeah. The one that hurts me, because it is on that list, and it's one of my favorite entities in the world of folklore, is the Kraken. Yeah. I wish the Kraken was more badass. It doesn't have legendary resistance, or that was it. Yeah, it doesn't have legendary resistance, which really pokes a hole in the Kraken. I know that they can be used to like destroy ships for low level parties and all of that, but I wish that they posed a bigger threat to a higher level party who's going Kraken hunting. That was always something that I wished that we got. Do you have a personal favorite monster that you're like, doesn't deliver as much as I wish it did?
I do wish that dragons had more customization.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, you do have like,
I don't want my dragons to have spells. I want my dragons to have magic powers that are dragony and not spells. But I want dragons to be able to have like more abilities that make it seem like they're elementally in control of the world around them.
Here's a question that we get a lot, and I think it's important that we answer it. Is Dungeons of Drakkenheim going to be compatible with VTTs, particularly maps, lighting, and tokens? So here's I'll start this off, and then Monty, you can kind of add to it. But something to keep in mind is that we did look into VTTs extensively, and we're continuing to look into them. But for the purposes of this Kickstarter and making the book, it turns out that there is a lot of business end things that have to go down in order to be compatible with VTTs. We are not working under Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast has directly been able to kind of link their products
with D&D Beyond, and like we would need like other virtual tabletops, like we would have to, they have a marketplace, and they have rules and restrictions on what can go on their marketplace and how that works. And it's a little bit, there's some logistic issues with running a Kickstarter and then giving you something that you can activate on another VTT. There's some strangeness there. And so here's what we're going to do. The content in the book, the digital content, there will be support for VTTs in that the maps, you'll be able to use the maps and stuff in VTTs, but are we going to have, like, if you've seen, like, if you've ever bought, like, on Roll20, like one of the pre-done ones that is done up, unfortunately, we're probably not going to get there, but that might be something that we explore after the Kickstarter. It just might not be something that happens at right away. We definitely do want to have more support for VTTs because more people are playing online than ever before. Just there's a lot of logistics that go into it, and so you'll be able to kind of the way that I'm saying it is that we are VTT neutral. We're going to give you the tools that you can do this on the VTT of your choice. It will be a little DIY, and we're going to still look into the more possibilities beyond that.
I'm excited to answer this question, so I might take this one. From Red Cape Time Traveler asks, do the monstrosities and the narrative of Drakkenheim, was it inspired by The Thing by John Carpenter? There's a few things that you need to know about this. Number one, The Thing is probably in my top 3 movies of all time. I am very much influenced by The Thing. But I also want to point out that another one of my favorite things is the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. I'm a big fan of the lore of Lovecraft and Lovecraftian, just the Lovecraftian horror, which is cosmic horror at its core. The Thing to me is John Carpenter telling a Lovecraftian story. So The Thing is to me, The Thing is actually very specifically, even though I've read extensively online, and John Carpenter says this wasn't an influence of his. However, he did read the book, and it's possible that it was in the back of his mind. But there's a story by H.P. Lovecraft called The Mountains of Madness that feels like The Thing kind of was a nod. It didn't take the story verbatim, but it was a nod to The Mountains of Madness. But if you are looking at Drakkenheim is very much influenced by all of H.P. Lovecraft's works, because H.P. Lovecraft deals with cosmic entities, stones that emanate a weird color that changes and mutates people. He also has dealings with demons that come into the plane of existence. All sorts of things. He has ghouls, dream worlds where people traverse through different planes of existence. And all of it is set in a very cosmic horror vibe. So yes, The Thing was a major influence, but also The Thing at its core was influenced by other things that influenced us. So all in all, the short answer to sum it all up, yes.
Yep. I'm going to take this question from X Callisto. We have a player who has a tendency to go wherever people think I should go, or do whatever you think is best, or offer others to make decisions so repercussions won't be on her. How do we as fellow players help empower our friend to engage with the game and make choices for herself without seeming like we're putting her on the spot for being so wishy-washy? I'm going to say be careful here, because your friend might be that might be how they're having fun. Like, they want to just go with the flow with things, and maybe they don't want the game to be about them, and maybe they are more comfortable with that. So be careful about pulling someone outside their comfort zone. And I would ask you, have you talked to them about it directly, and ask them, are you enjoying that? Like, is that what you want? Do you want to like have a conversation outside the game? Not on game night, not after game night, not before game night, but on a night that isn't game night. Just ask, like, you know, would you like to take the initiative more? Or have your DM say, like, how, like, and make it an offer. Like, don't make it seem like it's something they have to say yes to, because sometimes there are players out there that are much more comfortable. I've had some great friends of ours have played D&D with us, and that's the way they enjoy to play D&D. They just want to relax. They just want to unwind. They want to slay some dragons and hang out with friends and have a good time. So check first. Then it could, then if the answer is, yeah, I really would like to make some more decisions, you'll get a reason from them, and they might say, well, I'm a little bit nervous, or it's like, it seems like all of you are so experienced and so good at the game that you just know it better than me. It might be a confidence thing on their part, and so that's where, you know, extend your friendship, and meet them where they're at, rather than trying to say, hey, you need to get up to here with us. Find out where they are and work with them where they are, and help them approach the game from a position that is fun for them.
Awesome. I like this question. How would you approach a Drakkenheim campaign where many of your PCs want to be card-carrying members of opposed factions? And is there any guidance in the book for this scenario? So here's the interesting thing about that. In both Dungeons and Shadows, our characters may have had ideas of who they were working with, but this is going to depend on your party and your dynamic. But I think something that was important in Dungeons of Drakkenheim was that actually Veo was representing the Hooded Lanterns. She was kind of already connected to them. Sebastian was kind of connected to the Amethyst Academy. And Pluto was actually, I mean, he ended up being connected to Caspia, but on the outset, he chose the Silver Order as the faction he was most interested in being connected to. It just kind of ended up moving in a different way. But what happened is the choices had to be made. And if you watch the show, you can see Pluto throughout the early bit of the campaign discussing whether or not they should work with, like, oh, maybe we should work with the Silver Order. Maybe that's a good idea. And throughout the campaign, the players are going to have to make the choice, because let's say you have 5 players and they all choose a different faction. Well, not every faction is going to win. And the question then becomes, and this is where it gets tricky. This is going to be the hard part that you as DMs and you as players need to figure out, because this is not accounted for in the book. But the preferable option is that your players find that working together is more important than representing their faction, and that their personal goals for Drakkenheim, how they can achieve them, outshines the goals of the factions, which brings to the point where players will have to some players might have to abandon their factions to get what will make the group succeed in their mission for Drakkenheim. And that's a choice that needs to be made. And I think that it's fun to pull on all the strings. Different people wanting to join different factions means that you're going to have those interesting conversations at the table. But I would push for the player characters to try to come together on their choices in the end, rather than have a player versus player mentality, because that's where it's going to get messy. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Let's get another one out of chat here. Arash Steindam asks, what's the best way to show the consequences of concurrent plot lines or threats that the players chose not to deal with? Okay, you have to be really careful with this. Did the players actively choose not to address that problem? Or did they like, oh, that sounds cool, but we're going to do this now? right? Because that's where you need to, there's a difference. If the players, if you, I would say it's like this. In the XCOM video games, often what happens is you're presented with 3 quests at the same time, and you can do one of them and it will be good, but the 2 that you don't pick, you're going to suffer consequences from those being the ones that you didn't pick. That is telegraphed to you at the beginning of the game. And you know that you choose, like, and so it's like that question of like, oh, the dam is collapsing. Are you going to go help the people that are drowning? Uh-oh, the volcano is exploding. Are you going to go help the people that are getting engulfed by lava? That's a very clear choice. You can't help both of them at the same time. And you know that choice is going to have consequences, but you have to make the choice. But it's not clear to players if you're like, hello, sir, I am a quest giver. Would you like to go to my dungeon of mystery? And then another person goes to them and goes, hello, I'm also a quest giver. Would you like to go to the cave of surprise? And if you want to be like, there's consequences because you didn't go to the cave of surprise. You didn't telegraph it strongly enough that there were going to be consequences for not going to the cave of surprise. So make sure that the consequences were telegraphed to your players, because if they weren't telegraphed, they're gonna fall flat and your players are gonna be like, that's weird, like what happened there? So it's really important that when you have plots advancing, when the players don't know it, you want to make sure that you're giving the rumblings on the horizon, right? So like if we go back to our previous example of the dam and the volcano, I would be like, well, halfway up the dam, you see the screams of the people as the fire element, like you see the problem getting worse on the other side. So you have to make sure that you're giving your players the opportunity to kind of like decide, do you want to turn off here and deal with this problem instead before you hit them with the consequences on it?
Awesome. Looking for more. You got any good ones?
Oh, I mean, there's chat's moving really fast. I
know. I'm trying to keep up.
Right. With all of this. Oh man. Lost Cause asked, have you thought about doing more than 2 videos a week? Yes, we have. We do 3 videos a week. We do the subclass tier rankings. We do the live streams. There's actually only 1 week a month where we don't do 3 videos, because we do the like this week we did the live stream, the Q&A, and this. So we do. I don't think we could do much more than what we're doing.
Yeah, if you're specifically asking for more either content videos or live streams, we'll see in the future if we can fit another live stream, and that's something that I would like to do, is run my own game at some point. But right now we are tapped out. I am doing a lot of editing every week, and I do not wish to do much more editing than I am doing. Cause yeah, we have the live stream, we have the tier ranking videos, the regular Thursday videos, and then we also have our Q&A every month. So we are doing as much as we can currently handle. Maybe post the book, although honestly, post the book, I would love to start writing more books. So that might take the place of more videos, as we might try to create content. Create
a balance of content, right? I think that would be fun. I would enjoy that. Jay Sweckert asked, any advice for how to help new players understand and make good use of their spells and abilities without feeling like you're just telling them when to use something? I would design a problem where one of their spells or abilities is a silver bullet, and just let them, and just like, you know, if your player has, and make it really obvious, right? Like if you're like, my player has never used Dimension Door, create a scenario where teleporting is very obviously the solution, and they're going to feel awesome. Also, it's just a matter of time. Like if your players are new, focus on simple scenarios and just like sometimes they just need practice, and sometimes it can take, I don't know, when we were playing with Elder Broom, it was like 2 years before he could understand anything other than how to rage. So give him time, give him the chance, right? It takes time. Some people, it takes a long time.
Here's a fun question. I'm playing an Owlfolk Twilight Cleric with the Observant feat, and I'm always chosen to take point on excursions. I feel like I'm taking too much of the spotlight. Any tips to share the spotlight? Here's what I'll say is try to figure out what all of the other players at the table are excellent at and encourage them if they are putting you up front. I try to do this in Drakkenheim as much as possible, where like if they're like, oh, Kelly, you're the rogue, you should sneak in. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to sneak in, then we need to get you doing like, I'll use Shadows of Drakkenheim. I'll actually use the last episode as kind of an example without giving any spoilers. But if I'm going to be sneaking in, I know that our warlock is excellent at disguising himself. So is there a way that we can use a disguise so that he also has a spotlight on him? And I know that Jill's fighter is going to be good at smashing things and murdering people. So where is she going to be the most impactful? And if they're like, Kelly, your character, go do this. And I'm like, okay, you two go do these things. And now I've thrown it back on them that yes, they're asking me to lead an expedition or a certain element of the adventure. And I make sure that they also feel like they are doing it. And I think all three of us do that.
You know what else would be a really great way to help players use their new abilities? It would be really awesome if like these two guys in Canada decided to make some cool videos on YouTube that could be easily sent to other people that had like cool class guides and like guides to spells and stuff like that. You know, where we talk about like some of the weird combos in D&D and how like players can work together and stuff. Like, wouldn't it be awesome if somebody made a video of like the best damage dealing spells or like spells for creative players and magic items for creative players?
Monty, I found a few, but they're way too long. I can't watch. I can't watch those.
Yeah. In long and short of it, we made a bunch of videos about that. Have you tried showing your players our videos and asking them maybe to watch them? Maybe they'll help.
So fun fact, the original conception of this channel was because Monty and I were on the Dungeons and Dragons Facebook group and we kept answering the same questions. And I was like, what if we just made a video answering the question so that we could just post it every time somebody asks it? And that is the original thought seed that turned into Dungeon Dudes. So that's the purpose of our videos, is that if there's a question out there and one of your players goes, how do you play a cleric? You can be like, well, actually, here's a bunch of videos. You can spend your time watching two handsome devils talk about clerics for hours.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, also, you know, we like it when people watch our videos. There's so many people that have found them helpful in that way. Yes, some videos are long, some are short, some are fun tips, and it might just be, you know, send if particularly we made those videos on like spell combos and stuff like that, so people could find just fun inspiration and ideas in that way.
We are nearing the hour here, so I think that we'll kind of wrap up taking questions there. But this has been a treat. I'm not going to lie. Monty and I made a bet right before this. He said that we wanted to try this whole streaming on YouTube, and Monty said he thinks we might get more viewers on YouTube than we do on Twitch. And it looks like you were right, and I owe you a drink. So,
we'd be curious to hear your feedback, actually, whether in the comments or below on how this worked. What's cool about this is that you'll be able to watch the replay right away. But for those of you that are watching this to the end, thank you very much. If you're in the future from now, the future, good
job. You made it. You made it to the end. You did it, and I'm proud of you.
And so, we might try this. We're going to be back here on Monday.
Yeah.
To live stream the launch party of Dungeons of Drakkenheim on Kickstarter. So see y'all on Monday then when the campaign goes live on Kickstarter. Links are in the description below, or head on over to drakkenheim.com for the latest updates, and that will get you on over there. Please, we have made this our labor of love, and we cannot wait to share it with you all.
Yes, and for all of you giving us the well wishes as we close this off, I want you all to know that I love you too, and just thanks for being here. This has been a treat, and we're sending the hearts. And just have a good weekend, and we'll see a bunch of you back here on Monday to celebrate the launch of our very first Kickstarter.
Thank you so much. See you Monday.
Bye.